Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is a review of the 1988 crime drama, Cop. When a cop cares too much, how far is too far? Now, before I get into sharing my thoughts on this film, I want to give a shout out to David for requesting this review. If there is a film you'd like to see me review, or a topic you'd like to hear me discuss, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below. Now, Cop is one of those films that didn't do much when it came out, and that's not necessarily the film's fault. Atlantic Films at the time was barely keeping their doors open. They couldn't even afford to give this proper advertising, despite the fact that it actually did get some critical acclaim from some well-known critics at the time. Uh, you had good reviews from Roger Ebert, who gave the film 3 out of 4 stars. And there were a few other critics who were well known and well respected who also liked the film. But Atlantic had no money, so they couldn't really advertise it properly. Also, I think the title, despite it working, I feel it was too generic for some, and they thought it was just a generic, forgettable, everyday, been there, done that cop thriller. And that's not really the case with this movie. This film is rough, it's gritty, and it has an intensity that I feel that is not quite matched by other cop films. I think it's one of those movies that goes places that other cop films don't want to really go. Kind of reminds me in some ways of something like Bad Lieutenant, but not nearly as intense, not nearly as controversial, but it still has that kind of vibe because it shows a rougher side of cop life and of investigations and all of these things. It shows how the lines are blurred between cop and criminal, and it also shows you the kind of psychological effect that being a cop for so many years has on cops and how it affects their relationships with their family and with their loved ones, and how it ultimately can send them over the edge if they find a particular case that really grabs them and becomes somewhat of an obsession. And that's really what goes on with this. I mean, the tagline, when a cop cares too much, how far is too far? And you can tell that Lieutenant Hopkins here, he cares immensely. He wants to nail this serial killer, and he feels that in his gut that this is a real problem, that there is a serial killer who's still loose and he's going to continue to kill if somebody doesn't stop him. But he doesn't have that much evidence. He just has this gut feeling, and that causes him to be alienated by his fellow police officers, his I'm trying to think of the right word. His police chief, the people that are ahead of him, and it just makes him even more desperate and makes him even more obsessed to see this through. And I feel that James Woods was a perfect bit of casting for this role. He took the bare minimum in terms of pay to do this movie because he was that passionate about the project. And you really do see it here. It's one of his most powerful, one of his most intense, and one of his best performances as an actor. And it's just one of those movies that really does pack a punch. It has all the power of a shotgun blast. And at times, it can be a little bit tedious because of how things are unfolding with the plot. It's a little predictable at times. And there's a romance angle with James Woods and Lesley Ann Warren that isn't really that effective. And kind of drags on a little bit too much, at least for me personally. And the ending, while it is still pretty badass, I feel it could have been even more badass. And there are some other elements of the film that don't quite click for me, but at the end of the day, I still feel that this is a really solid cop thriller. And I don't even know if thriller is the right word. It's also a little bit more of a drama, but there are some thriller elements for sure. And there are some shots in this that looks like something straight out of a horror movie because of how the sequences are edited, how the direction is handled. And I just really love how raw and real this film is. It's not as glossy as a lot of other cop films were at the time, and in a lot of ways still are. It's directed by James B. Harris, who also wrote the screenplay, which is based on a film, not a film, it's based on a book called Blood on the Moon by James Elroy. And you have James Woods, who plays the lead here. He's the main focal point of the film. He's asked to carry the film on his shoulders, and he does a triumphant job in the end, doing just that. Just shows you how great of an actor James Woods is to carry this film. And you also have Lesley Ann Warren, who plays Kathleen McCarthy. Is a new age feminist who runs a bookshop, and she ultimately is the one that has the knowledge that James Woods is able to find about her secret admirer that enables him to figure out who the killer is. And so I know why she's there when it comes to the film's plot, but I just didn't really buy that her and James Woods had any chemistry. In fact, I felt that James Woods' character, Hopkins, he had way more chemistry with Randi Brooks' character, Joni Pratt, than he did with Lesley Ann Warren. And it seems like the script knew that, which is why they went back to that relationship near the end. So I'm like, what is going on here? Is he trying to have a relationship with Lesley Ann Warren, or is he trying to have a relationship with the other character played by Randi Brooks, Joni? And I feel that the screenplay didn't need to have so much back and forth with these relationships, especially going further and further ahead with this really awkward relationship or attempt at a relationship between James Woods and Lesley Ann Warren. I know why it's there to set up the reveal and to provide the way for James Woods to find the killer, but I feel the way that it's handled makes those scenes a little tedious and a little too slow moving because I'm not really buying into the relationship and I don't really want them to be together and I don't really care. But Lesley Ann Warren, she did okay with what she had to work with, but I just thought Randi Brooks was so much better, and that's why I actually did feel for her when her character ultimately wound up being killed in a gruesome fashion. Charles Durning is also in this as Dutch, who is a confidant and a companion and someone in the police department that helps James Woods' character and is willing to go along with his hunches and willing to put his ass on the line for him. And the scenes that they share together are quite good. They have some really good chemistry. Um, and you also have Charles Hayde, who plays this despicable piece of shit, dirty cop who you want to see get completely fucked up. And when he ultimately does get his just desserts, it's quite pleasing. Raymond J. Barry, he plays the captain, Fred Gaffney, who is tired of James Woods' character's loose cannon way of being a cop. He wants Hopkins to follow the rules more, and Hopkins is like, fuck that. You also have Steven Lambert, who plays the killer, Bobby Franco. He's barely in the movie, and I gotta be honest, he's one of the weakest parts of the film. He doesn't really have much of a screen presence, and I get it. He's only there for the finale and so on and so forth, because for the most part throughout the film, he's hidden in secrecy and you don't really know who he is. But I just felt that the guy was really lackluster, not memorable in the slightest in terms of his portrayal as a killer. Not really that intimidating either, but I think that might have been kind of the point. He's this guy who doesn't really look like what you would think would be this serial killer. Um, that being said, as badass as the final scene is, I mean, I love the ending of this movie where Hopkins he's cornered Franco in the gymnasium, and Franco's like, "What are you gonna do? Like, aren't you gonna arrest me? Cuff me, officer! Aren't you gonna arrest me?" And James Woods, he's like, "Well, there's some good news and there's some bad news. The good news is you're right. I'm a cop, and I've got to take you in. The bad news is I've been suspended, and I don't give a fuck." And then he just pumps him full of shotgun blasts. That's an epic ending. It's pretty badass. James Woods really sells that line, but it could have been even more badass if you saw some blood squibs, if you actually saw the killer get pumped full of lead. It just cuts to black. He fires off some shots after he says that line, then it cuts to black. I would have liked it even more if you see the guy get fucking shredded with shotgun blasts and then fade to black. Because it just feels like it loses some of its impact, some of its power, some of the effectiveness with the decision to cut away from him getting his ass blown to smithereens. But maybe that's something that they did because of the budget. They couldn't really do the stuff with the blood squibs. Blood squibs don't cost that much. You could have done it. You could have figured it out. But despite my issues with the ending, it's still really effective. I love that line of dialogue. It's honestly one of the more underrated, badass one-liners out there, and just a great way to end the film. And the script is peppered with a lot of really dark comic dialogue and some genuinely witty dialogue that's funny because of how off color it is. You know, how offensive the dialogue is. It's ballsy, it's not afraid to throw punches that a lot of films, even at the time, didn't really want to go for. And I can see why some people might watch this now and feel very triggered by some of the dialogue. But that's what makes it even more refreshing. It feels so much more real because there isn't a censor bar here. There is no filter. And I feel that is true with a lot of cops in certain environments when they're with their partners, when they're in their insular environments with one another. I think they do. They say things that would make people offended, and it's because they feel comfortable and they don't really give a fuck. And it also ties into the character of Hopkins. He does not give a fuck what you think. He doesn't give a fuck what his captain thinks. Why do you think he'd give a fuck what you think? So I think that really is something that works with this character. It just shows how much of a loose cannon he is by how he acts and by the way that he talks to his kid. He's talking to his little girl and telling her a cop story, and it's uncensored, and he's talking to her as if he's talking to his partner, and it's endearing, but at the same time, it's also a little unnerving that he's so comfortable with his daughter telling her exactly how things are. And there's even a message that's hammered in throughout most of the movie about how innocence is not always a good thing. Like, innocence can get you killed. That can be the very thing that can kill you. And that's honestly a message that rings true in this film and rings true in a lot of ways throughout life. Life is not all sunshine and rainbows. So it's refreshing and really nice to see a film like this that tells you like it is. It just shows you how life actually turns out to be, and it doesn't sugarcoat things. That being said, I would say as a writer, James B. Harris could use some work. Like I said, some of the ways that this film pans out when it comes to its story is a little too slow, isn't as engaging as other parts of the plot. But James B. Harris is a very capable director. I love how rough and tumble the film looks. It really does tie into the personality of most of the cast and its characters. In particular, the way that he shoots the scenes of violence, the aftermath of the killer's bloody rampage, really pack a intensity. They really feel like a gut punch, and I feel that that's in large part to due to James B. Harris's direction, as well as the editing by Anthony Spano and the cinematography by Steve Dubin. I think the score by Michael Colombier is not really that great, though. It doesn't really leave much of a mark. It doesn't really stick with you. It doesn't elevate any of the scenes it's in. It doesn't help with the mood or the atmosphere. Apparently, he did it without even seeing the movie because he was a fan of a film that James Woods was in, and you can tell that he didn't watch this movie when he made this score, and it's really unfortunate because this film could be even better as well with a much more effective score that understands what makes this film tick. But goes by at a pretty decent pace despite some slow spots here and there. I wasn't that bored by it, despite, yes, it was a little tedious at times, but it didn't really get to the point where I did not want to see how things unfolded. And in large part, that's due to James Woods, his intensity, his power when it comes to his performance. And they managed to do a lot with a low budget, and I definitely would recommend this one. I think it's a underrated gem, diamond in the rough. Not as great as it could be, but it's still a pretty damn good movie in its own right. This Blu-ray by Kino Lorber, it's the best transfer of the film out there. It looked good. Sound was a little quiet at times, but it was decent enough. It has an audio commentary with the writer and the producer, James B. Harris. I haven't listened to it yet, but if you're a fan of the film, I'm pretty sure that's probably something worth listening to. And I don't believe that's included on any of the other releases of the film. So, yeah, I would say if you want a cop film that is not afraid to take risks and isn't like your normal, average, everyday cop movie from Hollywood, I would say give Cop a watch. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of Cop, and as always, I'll see you later. See ya.